Hello and welcome to Therapist Connect broadcasts. So I'm here today with Mick Cooper and I'm here to interview him. I'm Caz Binstead, for anyone who doesn't know me. I co-run Therapist Connect. So Mick is an internationally recognised author, trainer and consultant in the field of humanistic, existential and pluralistic therapies. He is a trained counsellor and psychotherapist, originally in existential therapy, and currently Professor of Counselling Psychology at the University of Roehampton. So welcome, Mick. Good to have you here. Really good to have you here. So this is a special interview, and it's really to mark Mick's life dedication to our profession. Really, he gave me a copy. He gave me a copy of his CD, and it's just absolutely massive. So
yeah, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I don't know. Is it a good or a bad thing? Look, let's move on.
I was just going to say, probably for the environment, it's not a great thing.
Yeah.
Pages.
Yes, that's true. It's a very good point. Let's start maybe with a question around what drew you to this field.
Well, I did an undergraduate degree in psychology, and I'd been in therapy as a kid, and I had quite a few issues that anxieties that I'd been in, but I don't think I'd kind of set out to be a therapist. I'd done a degree in psychology, and then I was quite interested in journalism and writing. I really wanted to get into TV and do TV production, but I was really struggling to get any work in my 20s. And then I started doing a PhD on the psychology of masks. So I was kind of interested in how masks transform us and change us. And when I started doing that at the same time, I thought I should do something a bit more practical. So I started doing a counselling training at City University. I kind of went on from there and then did that for a year and then had a bit of a break. And then I think I wanted to go on and train as a therapist. It seemed like, but I think for me, it was always, my interest was, and I think it has been, in kind of social well-being. And I've always been very political. I come from a progressive background. And so I think I've always seen, for me, therapy has been one route towards this question about how do we improve well-being as a whole, and that ties in with the kind of social justice about how do we do that in a way that everybody can have a kind of fair opportunity really to experience a good life. So I think it was part of that really, rather than a kind of more clinical maybe kind of treatment. I want to treat people, and I was also fascinated. I mean, I guess I found it fascinating, and I still do. I was going to say the workings of the human psyche, but actually I think it's more about a fascination with how people experience things. And that drew me to the more existential, maybe phenomenological, just how it is to be another human being. What is that experiencing like of people in different communities, different cultures, different worlds? Just really, really fascinated in that kind of breadth and depth of human experience. And we got this cat, and I know with my cat, I just sit with a cat and just try and work out, what is it experience? Why is it sitting there? What's it thinking about? What's going on? I just find it fascinating. Why doesn't it like me? It's a really anti-social cat. I got to say, it's my kid's cat. And they love it to bits, and we do love it to bits, but I don't think it likes me very much.
So every day you get up and question, why doesn't the cat like me?
Why doesn't the cat like me? Yeah, it's not the
informing of your work. But no, I mean, it's fascinating to hear, and I absolutely hear you. And I mean, actually, I'm an integrative therapist. I work very existentially as well, so I really understand what you're saying. But it sounds like for you, some of the importance of therapy is very much about really seeing the whole person in a larger system as well, and what that means for people.
Yeah, definitely seeing people within a larger system and not just focused on kind of mental health problems, but understanding people's well-being in a broader. I mean, we know that racism, we know that sexism, we know homophobia, all these things have a massive impact on people's well-being. So, and I guess some of my latest work and some of the things that I've been doing is just trying to bring in those understandings more, because when we're just working on a one-to-one level, I mean, it's fantastic work that we can do, and that's not take away at all from the value of that work. But in trying to bring about a world where people are happier, for want of a better way of putting it, that is one part of it. And there's also the kind of social change element. I mean, my dad was, I've written a bit about this. Both my parents were members of the Communist Party. And they were kind of humanists, and my dad was involved in the film business for a number of years, and he was quite a kind of influential figure in terms of bringing in European films and more kind of progressive films from Eastern Europe, and kind of more critical thinking films. And but he was very politically driven, and I think that kind of thing about trying to make a positive change in the world is something that I really took. And when I think back about the work I do, that's what kind of links it all. The pluralism, the stuff around existentialism, and some of the more stuff about directionality, and all my work is linked by that theme of trying to think about how do we create a world where people are where we're getting on better and where we're happier. It's kind of naive, I guess, in a way, but it's what feels meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you touched there on something that I suppose a lot of people would be very interested in, actually, that link between different modalities. I mean, you've written books on person-centered therapy, I think it was the Handbook of Person-Centered Therapy, relational depth, existential therapy, obviously, and more recently pluralistic. So just maybe just say a little bit about your
I mean, for me, there's an absolute there's very clear threads that run through. I know it sounds a bit kind of fragmented maybe, but I mean it is, and what links it is really that social. I mean, I love person-centered approach because it's about valuing the client and what clients bring, and the way that clients have so much that they can offer, and rather than coming to clients from a kind of I know best what's best for you. Really listening to clients, really valuing clients, really trusting clients, recognizing that clients have a lot to bring into therapy, and working with that feels really important. I think existential does something very similar, and for me, what I love about existentialism is that it really gets away from the idea that people are kind of machines that get kind of programmed to do things, or like kind of rats in a cage or something. The idea of freedom that existentialists really emphasize, and of course it's freedom within limitations, but it's about trying to hold on to the person as having some agency and choice and volition. And then that's something that I've really worked through in some of my last book, was around this idea of directionality, trying to articulate what that is, that way of understanding people that can understand those social limits and the social forces, but doesn't ever lose sight of the person as a choosing volitional agent. And then the pluralism for me is all about that, really. Pluralism is about how do we engage with clients in a way that allows them to, that supports and fosters that choice and that freedom, and doesn't impose on them a particular way of doing therapy. And I guess, it's been interesting that a lot of the debates around that have been with colleagues in the person-centered field, but I do feel that pluralism is very fundamentally person-centered, but it's kind of maybe at a meta level. And at a meta level, in the sense that it's recognizing that for not every client, person-centered, that kind of classical person-centered way of working is the most helpful thing, or what they want. And that's not to say at all that for some clients that isn't really, really helpful. I know, and the evidence shows that for some clients it's amazingly helpful, that classical approach, but that doesn't mean it's helpful for everyone. And pluralism, I guess, is about also acknowledging that difference, acknowledging that clients are different, valuing that difference and the diversity across clients and across different communities and different cultural groups, and thinking about therapy in a way that allows for a responsiveness to that difference. Now, that doesn't mean, and I think one of the misunderstandings of pluralism is that we're not saying that therapists should be able to do everything and they should be able to do psychodynamic with one client and person-centered and CBT. And so, it may be that you just work in a classically person-centered way, or a classically psychodynamic way, or a CBT or ACT, or any of these ways. But it is something about kind of recognizing that different clients may benefit or want different things at different points in time, and thinking about how are we responsive to that, whether or not we can actually accommodate that ourselves. So I think it kind of, all those different ways of thinking about therapy, all for me link, and some of the writing I'm doing at the moment is now more specifically about trying to take ideas from psychotherapy and counselling and bring that into the social justice field, and saying that actually in the therapy field we have a lot that we've learned about people and about how change happens, and that's things that we can contribute to political debates and political perspectives and a kind of progressive politics. Because I think one of the things that I'm kind of very mindful of, and I kind of sad about, is that where you look at the kind of agendas and the thinking of some of the kind of more progressive political parties like the Green Party and the Labour Party, they don't really have a kind of psychological analysis. They don't have an understanding. Like, they talk about creating a better society and more well-being, but what does well-being mean? What does thriving mean? I mean, we do so much work about that. That's what we look at, and I'd really like our thinking, our understandings to get a bit more integrated and a bit more joined up with some of those approaches. So that's what I'm kind of working on later. And again, I think it very much links with everything that I've been doing.
Yeah. I mean, that is such a good point, because I think that probably most of us in the field would be, I guess, a bit curious about the way that our profession is not used. The profession of counselling and psychotherapy is perhaps not utilised as much as we can be, and to think of that in the way of, well, actually, how much understanding is there, and how can we help with that? It feels really important.
Yeah, I mean, we really understand. You know, we understand. For instance, we understand how important relationships are to people, and early relationships, and emotional literacy, the capacity for reflecting on ourselves, that those are the kind of things that can really help people thrive. You know, we know that thriving isn't just about saying, right, I want to be happy, that it needs things like, it needs really good relationships from an early age. It needs emotional literacy, and the training in emotional literacy can be really important. Empathy towards others, that capacity to deal with ruptures and how we deal with ruptures, the ability to kind of stand back from maybe our immediate responses to something and to kind of reflect mentalization. So we've learned all these things, and you know, where you've got political parties trying to create, you know, better societies where people get on better with each other and have a better quality of life. I think those insights are really important. You know, if we're going to have a more communal, a kind of closer society, I think things like emotional literacy training in schools and you know, learning how to do relationships, parenting training, those things are going to be just so central to it, and I think it should be really integrated in there. So yeah, that's what I'm looking at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you mentioned about parenting and young people, and you have done quite a lot of work with children and young people in your career
as a researcher. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and that's been fascinating, looking at I mean, the quality, I mean, that's been quantitative. So we just finished a really big randomized trial of school counselling and looked at the effectiveness of school counselling. But what we've also done there is talk to kids, listen to kids. We've interviewed over 50 young people with NCB about their experiences of school counselling, and that's just fascinating. I mean, you listen to these stories and you get such a kind of depth and a richness. And, you know, so one area, I guess, in my career has also been a lot of an emphasis on research, and doing research has been really important to me. But again, it's about research. For me, research is not about setting a kind of saying, okay, we research it because then we learn how to do it. It's about, for me, research is a lot about listening. When you're doing research, particularly like quality research, if you're sitting there with 50 interviews of young people talking honestly because they've been interviewed by somebody independently about their experiences of school counselling, the understandings you get from that, and the way that challenges, you know, because as a counsellor, I've had my training and I might think, right, empathy is really important, or relational depth is really important, because, you know, I've written books about, you know, so relational depth. And then you sit with kids and they say things like, you know, relational depth, you know, means nothing to me. And so it challenges me. And it means that I'm listening to the voice of these young people. And it's just fascinating what they say. It's been, you know, they are quite challenging, you know, for me, for instance, as a person-centered counsellor, and from that background, one of the things the kids say is that they often find the silences really uncomfortable, really awkward. Seen a lot of kids say that, and that's challenging, but it's also important, because it means, okay, we have to think about how do we modify maybe what we do as counsellors, as, you know, developing competencies around these areas so that we can work as well as possible to people.
Absolutely. And of course, the wisdom of children and young people, I think as adults, we could learn a lot, couldn't we?
Very honest.
Yeah. Just coming back to some of the things that you were saying there about, well, I mean, really, when you're talking, I can really see how everything ties together. If we return to pluralism, well, just a couple of things. First of all, it really struck me when I saw the advertising for the Pluralistic Conference. Unfortunately, I couldn't go this year, but I saw some of the things that were going on, and it made me think about some of the things that we talk about in Therapists Connect, which are very much to do with, you know, inclusivity and being respectful of people from whatever cultural background they come from, you know, who they are. All of that kind of thing. So I don't know. I'm just curious about. I mean, actually, the title of our conference, of our week's conference, is Community, Collaboration, and Connection.
That's brilliant.
So yeah, how do you think? How do you see that in the pluralism?
Well, I mean, one of the things I love about pluralism is that, and it has really grown on me. You know, John and I and others came up with the term, I guess, about 10, 15 years ago. But I really do like the term. One of the things I like about it is that it's not just about therapy. It's not, you know, like transactional analysis is specific to therapy, but pluralism is a philosophy. And it's there around when you think about, for instance, theology, there's pluralistic theology, and when people talk about pluralistic societies and people talk about it in terms of culture, and it is exactly what you say. Pluralism is a value basis, and it's a value basis around inclusivity, around recognizing difference, valuing difference. The way that I describe pluralism at the moment is about holding a space open for difference. And it's you know, it's like there's these doors that are kind of trying to shut, and it is actually, there's something active about pluralism. It's not just about saying, you know, everybody's welcome, but it's, you know, I think what we try and do, and what I hope we do, and I'm sure you're trying to do as well, is to really actively make that space where difference can be valued and where different voices can be heard. And I think that, you know, because we live in a society and a culture and a community where, of course, there are power differences, and those doors are very easily shut within the council community, where it becomes very white, and so creating space for people from different cultures to come in, we have to kind of actively do. And I think pluralism for me is something about actively. It's not just maybe, and I don't get crucified for this, but I think maybe a bit the difference between pluralism and person-centeredness is that person-centered is a kind of natural trust, which I think is enormously important in a person. These things will happen, but it's kind of in person-centered, I guess you're more kind of watching the doors open and close and really valuing that, and you're really valuing them when they're open. And I think pluralism is a bit more actively trying to create that openness. And and so, for instance, like, you know, with person-centered is absolutely, it invites being adaptive, for instance, to the client. But I think in pluralism, you go that step further, which is where you ask the client, for instance, how would you like to be working here, and what sort of things do you think would be helpful for you? Whereas I think from a person-centered standpoint, you'd be really open to that, but you might not. You trust that if those are the issues for the client, that will come out. Whereas I think pluralism is maybe a little bit more from a political standpoint of thinking or seeing or hypothesizing that there are power differentials, which means that we have to be active about these things. But it's interesting. I mean, yeah, and you can read pluralistic philosophy. There's people like Isaiah Berlin, people who've studied William James. There's this whole philosophical tradition about prizing different, and it's amazing. You know, I guess there's these two forces in our world, isn't there? There's always the one which is about systematizing things and putting things into boxes and closing things down and having things ordered, and then there is this one about diversity and creativity, and of course we need both, but pluralism is really wanting to create that space for the creativity and inclusivity and difference, you know, reminding ourselves about the importance of difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually on that detail, and it might be that what you've just said is the answer to this question, because as an integrative, I was originally trained humanistic integrative. I did your workshop at the beginning of the year with online events, because I was kind of curious. I was thinking, what's the difference between integrative and pluralistic? I'm sure you asked this question a lot, because you mentioned that person-centered, but, you know, I don't know, what are your thoughts?
What are the differences? I wonder if part of it was just where it came from. So John McLeod and I, we didn't start off as integrative therapy. I mean, I trained in existential and person-centered. So it was kind of coming from that background and not knowing masses about integrative therapies, to be honest. Probably if I'd trained as an integrative therapist, would we have articulated? I kind of think, for me, what the difference is pluralism is about a value base. And it's about, as I was saying, it's a philosophy. It's about a way of thinking about the world. And that may lead to integrative practices. But also, pluralism is really about trying to embrace the whole field. And so you can absolutely be, say, a person-centered counsellor and pluralistic in your outlook. But it doesn't mean, by saying you're pluralistic in your outlook, doesn't mean you have to do loads of different things. It can really, you can have just one kind of way of working. And I think that's the difference, because when you say integrative, you're talking about a practice. It doesn't make sense to say, I just do person-centered practice and I'm an integrative. That would be a contradiction. Whereas you can say, I just do person-centered practice, I'm pluralistic, because it can just be a philosophy. And then I think in terms of practice, in pluralism, there is this really strong emphasis on tailoring the therapy to the individual client based on what we might call metatherapeutic communication, communication with the client about what they want and their preferences, and that shared decision-making process, which is often there in integrative therapies. But, you could be integrative without having much of that shared decision-making, potentially. So I think it's about kind of emphasizing. So I see it as a kind of humanistic, person-centered take on what it means to be integrative. But colleagues of mine like John Norcross would say, when you talk about pluralism, that's what we mean by integration. And if people want to call it integration, it doesn't really matter. It's the values and it's the practices that is the important bit. And what you call it doesn't matter. I think it is quite. I find the term pluralistic quite useful. Maybe it's something about it adds a political dimension for me. It adds a political, philosophical dimension that I don't quite see there in integrative. I think I see integrative is more kind of about clinical practices. Pluralism is maybe a bit more of a value base. Yeah. I don't think anyone would say integration is a value base. Whereas I think you would say pluralism is a value base.
Absolutely. But I mean, we've got a discussion on the birthday week, looking at modalities, and we've also got discussions with worldwide therapists. I think there's and also with SEPI, which obviously original kind of integration and questions about what's the difference between modalities, and even just when you're speaking just about how everything actually, people will jump at me if I say this, but some people are obviously very much in their modalities, and then others will kind of think there are crossovers. And
but I think sorry to interrupt, but I think when you say about people being in the modalities, I think there's a really important distinction between people being in their modalities in a kind of practice sense of loving the work they do, really kind of loving that way of working and kind of specializing in that. But that doesn't mean that you can't really value other ways of working. You can be really in your modality in that sense. Like a kind of surgeon, you might have a heart surgeon, but being a heart surgeon doesn't mean you're kind of dissing brain surgeons or something like that. You can still, you can really be in that modality, but still be pluralistic in the sense of valuing other modalities. But there is a kind of being in your modality, which is that more dogmatic, schoolist, this is the right way of working. With clients, it's about attachment rather than unconditional. And there's a kind of dismissiveness about, other modalities. And I think pluralism does challenge that. And I think pluralism would hold that it's not helpful, that kind of, I'm better than you. And it is there. I saw something, people often deny that and say, we don't need pluralism because everybody is very accepting. But, I just saw something the other day about something talking about making a joke about CBT being kind of completely ineffective in the long term. It was a kind of Facebook meme about, CBT, is ultimately doomed to failure. And I just thought, there's no reason to say that. As far as we know, CBT is as effective as other therapies in the long term. And because I know for myself that, of course, I've got biases. I mean, I recognize that I'm in a modality in the sense of, having allegiances with particular effects. And so pluralism isn't saying we shouldn't have them. It's saying we need to recognize them, and to some extent we need to put them to one side. Sorry, that was a long interruption.
No, I think it's all really, really important. I think actually, hopefully, this discussion is going to, really get people to be thinking around.
Yeah.
I think it's important. I mean, for me, the relationship is just at the heart of everything. That for me is kind of therapy, and that adds another dimension. I know Peter's said to me, and Peter's very, very, sorry, Dr. Peter Blundell, who also co-runs Therapists Connect, he's very, very person-centered. And he said before we started doing trainee talk, which is our training hour that we do once a week with students, he'd never really come across the other modalities, and that working with me being integrative, and that he's found that really, really interesting. So I think it's a good thing for therapists to be considering and thinking about, and like you say, from lots of different angles.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much out there, and I wish. I mean, one thing I really wish, and I think pluralism brings this a bit, is I wish training courses would start by telling students, look, this is what we're teaching you, and we're going to specialize in this, might be person-centered, but just so you know, there are these other things out there as well which are really helpful for people. There's CBT, which can be really helpful with somebody. There's psychodynamic that come. We can't teach you everything, and if we tried to teach you everything, you'd probably end up not being very good at anything. So we're going to teach you about this thing, but just so you know, this is one part of this field of brilliant sort of different ways of doing things. And I think if courses started from that, I mean, I know in my training it really was much more around this is the right way of seeing things, and there's these misguided people over there who don't really quite understand it. I mean, a lot of my existential training seemed to focus on why existentialism was better than psychoanalysis. We'd be having long lectures about the errors of Freud in 1920 or whatever, and it wasn't. We've been so much more helpful, I think, to look at what was useful about that, and particularly for those approaches like person-centered, existential, that talk about kind of unconditional acceptance. I mean, if we're going to talk about unconditional, we can't start dissing CBT and saying, oh yeah, but CBT is rubbish, or it's not effective in the long term. If we're holding this thing about unconditional and positive regard, we got to, it's really integral to who we are as people that we accept and we value different therapies. I mean, what's ironic is that all the different therapy modalities see kind of psychopathology, if you like, in terms of kind of black and white thinking. Whether it's CBT and dichotomization, or whether it's person-centered, or whether it's psychodynamic, kind of splitting between good breast and bad breast. All these things are about the dangers of splitting, and yet there's so much splitting in the field itself. And so we need to kind of look at ourselves. In our trainings, often we're encouraged to look at our past and our histories and our lives and think about those, and think about how that might bias us with our clients, but we're not always invited to think also about our allegiances to particular modalities and how that can bias us. And how a client, comes in and says, well, I find, for me, CBT things, I found them really helpful in the past, that if I'm a person-centered therapist listening to that, it might be quite uncomfortable for me to hear that. And that might mean that I respond in a particular way. I might say, well, maybe it would be useful for you to try person-centered, or I might, it might stop me being open to that. And I think pluralism is about trying to be open and really listening to clients and responding from a place of what's helpful for the client rather than what are my needs in this situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
We do. I mean, allegiances to particular therapeutic modalities is very powerful. It is very powerful. People have those allegiances. There's nothing wrong with that, but they are emotionally very powerful. And often we don't really talk about the emotion. So when you're talking about you're going to get dialogues between people, I mean, that's fantastic. But it's not just the theoretical interaction. There's also emotions there. There's emotions and there's commitments. And, if I've done 5 years training and I've been practicing in a particular approach, I've got an allegiance to that. And recognizing that, I think, is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you was, given you have, done so much in the profession, obviously thought so much about so many different things, a lot of research, a lot of supervising other people's research, writing. What for you, and this might be a difficult question, but what for you is your number one achievement, do you think?
Can I say having kids? Am I allowed to say that?
So we'll have that at the top.
Having kids, I've got 4 kids, and I think having, that was pretty amazing. What's been my It's so I mean, it is such a difficult question. I was thinking about this morning, actually. I wrote a book about called Existential Counseling and Psychotherapy. I think it was 2015. And I was really proud of that one. It hasn't been kind of massively read or massively cited or anything, but that was one I was really proud of because it brought together a lot of my thinking around phenomenology and the relationship. There's a chapter in there about Buber. And I was really proud of that, and I love the cover of that one. I think it's somewhere on my wall. I'm taking it down, but I was really proud of that. And doing that, I think seeing students going forward and getting their doctorates and things, and at the moment, I mean, I really love teaching. I mean, I'm doing more teaching at the moment, actually, and I just really love teaching and working with students and doing skills and training. So I don't know, it's difficult to kind of pinpoint one or two things, but I think that book I was really proud of. And pluralism, I am really, you know what I loved, actually, somebody made a set of a set of cards for pluralism recently. These pluralism, Shelley Brennan did these pluralism cards, and I love the ways that people have used pluralism and developed it. And I think one of the things I am actually really proud of is our pluralistic community, because when we had a conference, I mean, the last one was online and we had one in London a couple of years ago. And what was so important to me is people kept on saying it was such a warm and welcoming space. Like, I think Therapists Connect, is really on this, absolutely the same there. There was something about the way that we created this space, and I feel like at Roehampton as well, in the work we've done that in our research centre Crest, again, it feels like that's what we created is a space that is warm, welcoming, supportive of different ideas. In pluralism, it's a little bit messy. We kind of disagree with stuff. It's interesting, Caz. There's kind of like, I mean, in many ways, it's very person-centered. And it's that kind of space and people talk, but there's something about slightly more framework, slightly more support structures, I think, which people work hard to actively welcome. And, whether that's going to last, whether, there'll be some terrible collapse, I don't know. But for now, I think creating that friendly, welcoming community where we have meetings or we have conferences and I come away feeling like we've done work, and we've got things done, but also it's been friendly and, jokey, and, there's loads of really lovely people in that community. And I think that's what I'm really proud of, because partly because of it being there, and partly because it feels like that actually is possible to create those cultures and those communities where people can get on and people can enjoy themselves and do something productive at the same time. So, I think that's what I'm proud of, being able to create that.
Absolutely.
And just to say, actually, just on a personal level, I think that's particularly important for me because I've written a bit about this, but I'm kind of the youngest of 5. So my kind of life position, if you like, is kind of always looking up at this world and seeing myself as this kind of little person who can't really lead stuff, and he's kind of following other people a little bit and working out what the way to go is. And I think, so for me, feeling that I've done some stuff around, kind of leadership and help create stuff rather than at a personal level, I think that's been a real massive challenge to me, to feel that I can take something more of a leadership role and see then to lead stuff and then feel that I can create and shape stuff has felt really rewarding and satisfying and different and felt good.
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice to mention a few different things there, and yes, you've definitely succeeded in being able to create things, hence why we're here today doing this interview.
Well, it's kind of, lifetime achievement, that's hard to kind of, it's hard to think about these things, I think, because it doesn't feel like that. It just feels like you're kind of bumbling along and messing up and doing crappy stuff and some good stuff. But I think, it is moments like that where you're kind of in a community and you feel like things are working that feel really good. And I think that's in our counselling community, Caz, like there are, it's lovely to see what you and Peter were doing. And I think to see people like yourselves working together to create like communication and dialogue and getting people to talk, feels like those values that I guess are important for a lot of us are taking hold, and that we're not just fighting and arguing amongst ourselves and disrespecting each other. And I guess the other side of that is I do get upset, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I do get upset sometimes seeing like on Twitter and the ways that people talk to each other, you know, within the community, and, you know, not just to me, but to each other. That does upset and hurt me and sadden me and make me feel like, have we really learned anything?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is something that is very, very difficult, and has been very difficult for a lot of people. Again, we've got a little discussion on social media, actually. I think it's tricky because social media can be the only platform maybe that some people have. And I think because of past divisions, you know, it's really, really grown. But then also there's real limitations with social media. And like you say, emotion comes into things. And yeah, it can be very, very difficult to navigate, because when you talk about open and the importance of listening and open communication, all of that, it almost like takes, you have to really concentrate in order to do that on social media. I think it's easy.
It's not. And I think one of the things about pluralism, again, sorry, you keep banging on about it, but I think pluralism, one of the challenges is like pluralism is openness to voices. But what happens when you have voices that want to shut down other voices? Like, how do you respond to that? How do you respond to someone on Twitter saying, you know, fuck's sake, you know, shut up? Because as you say, I think it's really valuable what you're saying there about, you know, sometimes that is the only place that somebody can feel that, for fuck's sake, shut up can actually be heard. So pluralism isn't just about kind of trying to shut that down, but it's about, at the same time, if those voices dominate, it can destroy a system. So how you negotiate that and how you work with that is, I mean, that's maybe the cutting edges of what we need to learn. I think pluralism creates a framework where we can think about that and try and move forward in respectful ways, but acknowledging the difference, acknowledging that there might be a lot of anger in that difference.
Absolutely.
A lot of anger, and yeah, it needs to be heard, doesn't it? And sometimes that kind of nice and everything's welcoming and nice that in itself can be shutting down for people.
Yeah, very, very tricky, I think.
We're kind of learning, aren't we? We're kind of learning. That's the important bit, is that we're learning. We're not there, but we're learning and developing and thinking about how we talk to each other as a community. And I think that is, you know, as we learn, that stuff there that we can feed into the wider society in a sense.
Definitely. And that for me is part of being a therapist. My favorite word is reflection, you know, that constant kind of reflection. And I think we need to do that. And I think you're right about how that ripples out as well. It feels really, really important.
Yeah, and it's a reflection, not just at an intellectual level, but at an emotional level, and thinking, wow, somebody said that about me on Twitter, and how do I feel about that? God, I feel really hurt. It makes me feel really scary and feel vulnerable. Do I communicate that? How do I respond to that? Do I shut down and not engage with it? I mean, you know, the questions I have, I'm sure you have those questions. And but yeah, absolutely, it's about reflection, isn't it? And reflecting together and learning together. Reflecting together is learning together.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, I'm aware that we're coming towards the end of the interview, but I just wanted to, you know, kind of, I don't know, ask a little bit. You mentioned about your kids there. I've seen on your website, and also we're connected on Facebook, you know, you sometimes take photographs. You live down on the South Coast, which is where I grew up, so it's a lovely area to take photographs. But I don't know, what's important for you as a person?
Yeah, I'd love to say I love photography, but yeah, and if you ever see Andrew Reeves's photography, he's brilliant. I don't know if people know Andrew Reeves. He's absolutely amazing. So every time I see his photograph, I think, oh, I'm not really. Yeah, no, I do love photography. What was the question? What's important for me? What do I do?
Yeah, what makes you happy as a person?
What makes me happy? Definitely kids and spending time with kids, and just being around, interacting with them and engaging with them, and that's been fantastic. I do a lot of running. I think that's probably more stress management, but running along the seafront, that's really good. I don't know. I wish I did more, actually. You know, I am a bit. I'm not sure I'm a workaholic, but I do probably work more than what's the word? Probably more than I need to, and you know, kind of slowing down on that. I think relationships and with my partner, and that's really, you know, that time kind of going for walks, and that's kind of stuff makes me happy. Connecting. Yeah, I have to say that, really. If you write a book on relationships, you have to say connecting. I couldn't really say just being on my own, sitting on my own on my computer. That does make me happy as well. Excel spreadsheets, that's terrifying to acknowledge, but I do like, yeah, computing and things like that. But yeah, connecting.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen to that. So connecting with self, connecting with others, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a good word to end the interview on. Thank you so much for meeting with me today, Mick. It's been a real pleasure chatting.
Thanks, Kat. Well, it's lovely to be here, and congratulations. Happy birthday.
Thank
Like
you.
I said, I think it's fantastic what you've been doing, and yeah, I hope it goes really well.
Thanks a lot. And thank you everyone for watching.